Must be this 12-team expanded college football playoff format that has people saying stupid things. Or maybe it's just that I'm noticing them this week because I'm watching the game start to finish and there's not 135 teams playing at the same time. Or maybe it's thanks to you. Many of you are bringing these things to light and to my attention. Welcome into the Voice of College Football. Appreciate you stopping by for the best in discussion, debate, and analysis based on your participation. Please leave your comments and questions down below. All right, media takes over the weekend. We posted some from Kirk Herbstreit, also on the coaching sideline. Kurt Signetti, check out those videos just posted on Sunday. Let's get to more of the fallout from the first round of the college football playoff. First from Sean McDonough, ESPN ABC, one of the best in the business. Exceptional play-by-play guy. I have always loved Sean McDonough in the booth. When he's doing a game, you know it's going to be first class, first rate. However, there are times in which Sean McDonough loves to play the analyst. He switches lanes and he takes on the analyst hat and he loves to get on a soapbox. And he did that at the conclusion of Notre Dame and Indiana, with the Hoosiers getting blown out by Notre Dame. We know the final score was 27-17, but it was much worse than that, 27-3 with just about 2 minutes left to play. And of course, there had to be filler discussion between McDonough and Greg McElroy, and it was directed at first Indiana, then by extension, the Big Ten. Quote, "To be honest, this game's been a little bit of a dud. I don't think anybody would deny that. Disappointing. I think most of us thought it would be a more competitive game. I know there will be a lot of analysis going forward about whether Indiana was worthy of this." Well, the narrative is going to be, again, should Indiana have been in? The one thing I did not understand when we did the ACC championship game, Clemson played SMU, and a lot of people were saying, well, if SMU doesn't win the championship, they're probably out. Alabama's going to be in. I didn't understand why Indiana wasn't included in that conversation. I didn't understand. I know they were 11-1, but what was it about their resume that said they were clearly more deserving than SMU or Alabama? I actually don't have a huge issue with McDonough going after Indiana. To a large extent, I have as well, although I have said that I would select Indiana to the playoffs at 11-1. However, I have said that there is a clear and obvious and valid argument to look at their resume as the weakest in the history of college football for an 11-1 football team, having defeated no really good football teams and obviously not scheduling anyone in the non-conference. But then McDonough connected the Indiana loss to the strength of the Big Ten. Quote, "I think they need to lose the assumption that the SEC and the Big Ten are clearly head and shoulders above everybody else, particularly the Big Ten. I mean, the SEC has the recent history, Alabama, Georgia, but the Big Ten's won 2 national championships in college football since when? 2002? That's 22 seasons. I don't understand why there's this presumption. It seems from many that the Big Ten in particular is so much better than the ACC or the Big 12. I'm not sure what that's based on. The SEC has been the best conference in college football for 15 plus years. That is not debatable in any way. I will argue anyone into a fetal position under a table somewhere in the corner that debates me on that. Okay, that's well established. However, these playoffs should be determined on the individual teams first and foremost, but by extension, the conferences. And the conferences have to be evaluated on that particular season, 2024. Not what happened the last 22 years in the Big Ten or in the SEC. Let's evaluate what's happening this season. And of course, you got to look at the non-conference games. The SEC, I believe, is still the best conference. Significantly, no. The SEC is not the best conference. And this is about getting the best teams or the most deserving or justified teams into the 12-team playoff. And the SEC just didn't cut it with those 9-3 clubs, South Carolina, Ole Miss, and Alabama. Although it could be argued that they had better resumes, as I did, than Indiana and SMU in particular. But again, the SEC should not be given a free pass based on previous seasons. Each season needs to be evaluated, and the best way to do that is the non-conference games between the Power Four conferences. And In this particular season of 2024, the SEC was the best, but not by much. And of course, we will have our conference comparison and go through all the metrics and the results between the conferences in the off season once we have crowned a champion. Quote, our strength of schedule is the best because we play everybody else in our league and we're just assuming our league's better than everybody else, he mockingly quipped. The Big Ten is better than the Big 12 and the ACC. Again, I'm using my same criteria. I'm not going to last season with Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State being near the top of college football and Michigan, of course, being the champion. I am going by this season's results. The ACC and the Big 12 were awful out of conference. The Big 10 was marginal. The SEC was decent. There was a clear delineation between the SEC and then the Big 10 at number 2. But the Big 10 clearly better than a poor performing Big 12 and atrocious performing ACC. Look at their wins out of conference. There's not much there. So my basic complaint with McDonough's comments is that he was judging Indiana as the fourth best team in the Big Ten, maybe the fourth best resume. I don't know that if Iowa would have shown up in South Bend, Indiana on Friday night, that they would not have performed better than Indiana. Indiana just did not have the resume to hold up against the other college football playoff participants, but he extended it to the Big Ten, and that was way too early to do. Of course, Penn State and Ohio State came out on Saturday, and they rolled, and did you notice Penn State rolled against SMU? A 28-point win, an easy win for Penn State against SMU, and of course, it was just 1 week ago that McDonough had this to say about the qualifications of SMU. Quote, if you watch that game and don't think that SMU deserves to be in the college football playoff, then I would respectfully, strongly disagree with you. Strongly. Quote, I love this 12-team format, but if the message is, we thought you were better than Alabama or these other teams last week, McDonough later added, so you go compete your rear end off in a classic, as it turned out, championship game and lose on a field goal at the buzzer, and now we're going to move you back. I would agree with what Red Lashley said. Going forward, why would teams want to play in the conference championship? McDonough closed with one final thought. SMU had earned their spot. Their resume was good enough. So SMU's resume, their best wins included 8-4 Louisville, 7-5 Pitt. Were those the games that pushed SMU over the top? And that championship game loss to Clemson? Yeah, it was an exciting game, but let's separate quality versus what's exciting. There are tons of group of 5 games every Saturday that are exciting, but SMU got completely outplayed for 3 quarters. They did make a valiant comeback and took it to the wire before losing on a 56-yard field goal. I did not think that they should be penalized for that, so I clearly stood in the camp of SMU making the playoff based on the committee placing them at number 8 prior to the championship game. But let's make no mistake about Clemson football this year. This is not vintage Clemson, and there were some comments made about Clemson being a 10-year wonder of dominance in college football. Well, that's all true, but this is not Clemson of Trevor Lawrence or Deshaun Watson, as mentioned by Greg McElroy. This is a marginal Clemson team, meaning a marginally good Clemson team, a top 15 or 20 team in the country that SMU lost to, and by extension, Clemson, who did they beat this year? Oh, 7-5 Pitt. That was their big win. They lost to Louisville by 2 scores. Then there's the matter of Ole Miss head coach Lane Kiffin, who went to the mat for his team like any good coach should do, and his team definitely had a playoff worthy of consideration resume, but of course they were left out after losing to 4-8 Kentucky, 7-5 Florida. Among their losses, also LSU in overtime. And Ole Miss and South Carolina and Alabama, that 3-pack in the SEC at 9-3, left out of the playoff. And of course, Lane Kiffin, as he loves to go to social media, and X in particular, let his smirky comments be known until, guess what? Leading up to Tennessee, Ohio State. Well, Tennessee, 10-2 out of the SEC. They did have a nice win against Alabama, but besides that, can we really separate Tennessee's resume from Indiana's? Second best win, 7-5 NC State, 7-5 Florida. Indiana beat 7-5 Michigan and only lost 1 game to Tennessee's 2 losses, one to a 6-6 Arkansas team. So the Tennessee resume, not exactly sterling, although at 10-2, most of us agree that Tennessee should be included in the 12-team playoff. But if you are invalidating a team and their season and worthiness of being selected into the playoff based on how they perform in the playoff, then you got to play the same side of the fence, and you got to be consistent in evaluating Tennessee. They went to Ohio State. They got completely outclassed. Ohio State, Notre Dame, you would consider to be pretty much on the same level. And I'd say Indiana competed against Notre Dame slightly better than Tennessee did against Ohio State, but nothing out of the Ole Miss coach once Tennessee hit the field and was clearly overmatched by Ohio State. Now, do I believe that that invalidates Tennessee's resume for the playoff because they lost to maybe the best team in the country when they're playing at their best, certainly one of the top 4 or 5 teams in the country? No, I do not. But if you're going to take that stand, then you need to be consistent. And if you're going to pick on poor old Indiana and SMU, then you need to do the same for your SEC brethren Tennessee, because they were embarrassed. Then I came across a reel posted by Josh Pate of CBS Sports. I, like many of you, scroll through way too many reels, and I typically don't look at the college football ones. I've stated on this show many times that I don't really take in much college football analysis, even though I respect guys like Joel Klatt. Josh Pate's been on here a couple times. I respect him. I can't really vouch for his work. I don't watch it. But I really don't watch anyone because I'm running a business here and doing everything I can to post college football content of my own. I also don't want to be swayed. However, I ran into this reel and I thought it was quite interesting. And this is what Josh Pate served up, but it's extremely flawed. He said that the SEC, Greg Sankey, commissioner, should go to the College Football Playoff Committee and the powers that be and say, we need guaranteed spots. 3, I think preferably 4 is what Pate was going for there, 4 guaranteed spots. Because then you could say, doesn't matter what happens in the non-conference season, we're not going to get evaluated that way. We simply look at the SEC standings and say, those are our 3 or 4 best teams, and they should be guaranteed into the playoff. There are serious issues with that. On the surface, it may seem like a good idea. It is not for these reasons. Number one, we can't trust the SEC standings. There are 16 teams. They play 8 games. You miss 7 teams in the conference. That is ridiculous. It's becoming more and more, not just in the SEC, but the Big Ten as well, an invalid conference championship, illegitimate, because you don't see enough of the teams that you're competing against for the conference championship. Look at the SEC standings. In 2024, Texas won the number 1 seed to go to the championship game at 7-1. Texas did not play 6 of the top 9 teams in the SEC. Too many teams, they don't play each other. We know what happened at the top of the Big Ten. It was sorted out by a tiebreaker in terms of who would play Oregon in the Big Ten championship, as well as the SEC championship, which was a cluttered mess of 6-2 and 5-3 teams, as we see right there. So number one, there's too many teams to trust the standings in the conference. Number two, the SEC has proven incapable down through the years of actually formulating and implementing a legitimate schedule that's valid and fair and accurate and equitable. This is pathetic. The SEC has been pathetic when it comes to scheduling. For all the greatness of the SEC, being ahead of the curve of college football, being out in front of everyone else, being the first to an SEC championship game, doing all the other things that have been innovative in pushing ahead the sport and being ahead of the other conferences, when it comes to scheduling, the SEC is pathetic. For 30 years, the SEC split into East and West, and they had these ridiculous crossover games between divisions. The only ones that mattered, that were reasonable and valid because of rivalry, were Tennessee, Alabama, Auburn, Georgia, and to a lesser extent, LSU and Florida. The rest of them were made up, contracted games that had to be played every season. Ole Miss and Vandy made no sense. Mississippi State, Kentucky. There were 2 teams in the SEC that had the least to do with one another. If you could select 2 teams in the SEC over the last 12 seasons that had the least connection, it would be South Carolina and Texas A&M. But the SEC, in all its wisdom, had those two teams playing each other every year, while other teams all throughout the conference were playing each other once every 6 years. Horrible scheduling system. Okay, we transitioned to 2024 at Texas and Oklahoma. I posted a video before the season to say the SEC screwed up again. Look at Oklahoma's schedule. Look at Texas's schedule. One of them played a 65% winning percentage from the previous season in conference play. The other one played a 35% winning percentage in conference play. The SEC completely screwed Oklahoma, and they gave Texas a free path to the SEC championship game. Completely botched the scheduling. Can't get it right. The SEC, you do great in just about every other category of college athletics except for scheduling. It's pathetic. So I will not trust the SEC in getting a schedule right to determine a legitimate champion to advance teams automatically into the college football playoff. Point number 3 is that college football should be a democracy, meaning we should objectively, as best we can, evaluate these teams. It should be as objective as possible, and then when there is subjective evaluation of these teams, that it should be reasonable and rational, not based on the past. So we don't give leagues automatic bids and entries into the college football playoff. Now, the Big Ten and the SEC will probably win out because they wield the power in the sport to get guaranteed positions. But if the committee's doing its job, they are going to select either, let's get it straight, the 12 best teams in the country, which none of us know the 12 best teams in the country, but a legitimate argument for the 12 best teams in the country, or the 12 most deserving teams in the country, and let the committee do its job. If we're going to stay with this committee, which I don't want, I want an objective system, but if we're going to stay with the committee, let them do their job and not force them into a stupid system where we're assuming going into each season that the SEC and the Big Ten, and according to Josh Pate, I think he just pointed out the SEC, that the SEC is so good that they should have guaranteed spots. No, the team should prove it on the field, and especially in non-conference play. And if the SEC is so good, as they have been for the last 15 plus seasons, they will prove that on the field and pass the evaluation and get into the playoff. But if we're going to have a committee, trust the committee. Give them clear criteria, let them evaluate, give them as many objectives as possible. And no, we don't assume going into a season. If the Big 12 would go out next season and win all of its non-conference games against the power conferences, they would just wipe out everybody in their sight, or the ACC. Then we're going to discount that and say, no, the SEC gets 4 automatic spots. No, let the football be played. Evaluate the football. No guaranteed spots other than conference champions. It's a dumb idea. Appreciate you being here at the Voice of College Football. For the best in discussion, debate, and analysis, please like and subscribe. Leave those comments down below, and we will see you soon.